Hey Fur, hey Shawn, hey everyone else. While I wait for people to come in, I'm gonna, what am I gonna do? I guess I'm not gonna do that. I'll be right back. All right. No, my setup didn't change. It's just, there we go. I just have a black backdrop back there, as I have always had. What is that? The microphone. Yeah. All right, so I don't remember exactly to what degree I've gone and talked about things as opposed to just trying to do them. I think I don't generally talk about things that much. This is not Handmade Hero. I don't go into lots of detail. The stuff that I do go into tends to be stuff where I don't know what I'm doing. Like this giant thing I wrote trying to understand the networking or document what I didn't understand about the networking. It started smaller and I kept expanding it so that I could link it to people and say, please tell me, I don't understand this. This doesn't make any sense. Which of these things am I supposed to be doing? So today I'm going to actually talk about my new understanding of this, just because, basically because I've led you all astray with all this discussion, I think. And so I should document how I was wrong. And also I haven't fully worked through this I only tried to work through in my head. I haven't tried writing anything down to understand it. And so I will do that live on the stream. I will work through trying to understand what I think I now understand. I could still be wrong. So what we're talking about is networking using client-server with client-side prediction. So the client side of this is really well documented, and the server side of it I didn't see much discussion about. And so in trying to understand what the server might do, I came up with a bunch of scenarios for what the server might do. And I showed these scenarios to a few people with networking experience, and none of them gave me a straight answer. And they didn't give me a straight answer in various different ways, like they ignored me, or they just kind of said, oh, I know what the right thing to do is, but they never got around to replying. I mean, these are just not friends. They're just people I know on Twitter or whatever, people I respect. I'm not complaining about their reaction at all. In fact, the opposite. I think all of this was a sign that I didn't understand it. And this question that I'm asking is a wrong question. This is not possible to answer in the form that I'm answering it now. In a great world, they would have realized that and told me the right answer. So I think that's what's going on. I could still be wrong because I haven't worked all this through yet. But I think what's going on is that this is just a misunderstanding. None of these actually make any sense. And the reason I came to that conclusion was a video that Shawn McGrath linked me to. That was a Blizzard talking about the networking in Overwatch, I guess. And hopefully someone can post a link to that in... Yeah, I knew it was that Fur. I recognize your first name too. I saw you on the stream earlier, the earlier streams. I saw you pop in. I said something, but boy, what was I just saying? That literally. Oh right, yeah. So the video. So hopefully somebody can link that video. And I'll add it, if somebody can remind me what the URL is, I'll add it in here just as a temporary thing so that the YouTube stream will be able to see it. But anyway, it was a video aimed at players, but sort of technical players who've been paying attention to things, so they kind of already know something about how networking works, and it was because the players had sort of reverse engineered how their networking works, so they wanted to sort of document it all clearly. They described things, and they didn't really describe the server part either. They talked about one part of it, which is that it buffered the client input. But they were very vague about this whole question that I was asking about what exactly does it do in buffering that input. And so when I first watched it, I kind of came away with it like that was all stuff I already knew. That didn't help me at all. But somehow, in reflecting on it, let's see if this is, yeah, I think this is right. Yeah, this is the video. So somehow in watching this video, I realized something, not watching it, in reflecting on it, I realized what I think my mistake is here, and which I'll walk through now. Or I'll walk through what I think the answer here is, and I'll try to work it out and make sure it actually works. So one of the fundamental things that happens in networking, unless you do lockstep peer-to-peer, like some of the early, I guess some RTSs did, maybe still do, I don't know. Unless you do lockstep peer-to-peer guarantees everyone just runs the exact same simulation on every machine. You're hosed by latency. So when they tried doing lockstep peer-to-peer early on, like maybe, I don't know, Doom maybe did that. And on a LAN, that was fine because the packets could get back and forth fast enough. But over the internet, the packets can't get back and forth fast enough for you to simulate at 60 frames a second. But I think the RTSs had a much slower tick rate and could simulate in lockstep, less frequent simulation steps, and the animations are kind of independent of the simulation or something like that. I'm not an expert in that stuff. I don't really know. That's sort of the impression I got. But the thing about those is that everyone sees the same thing. It's all consistent. So in client server, you say, instead of everyone simulating the same thing, let's have the server simulate everything. And then the server will broadcast it back out to everyone, and everyone will see the same thing. But the reality is that everyone won't see the same thing. And that's sort of, I think, the part I didn't fully understand when I tried to figure out what exactly it was the server was doing. And it's obviously true. Like, if you had asked me, I would have said, yes, of course, everyone's going to see a different thing. And I'll get concrete about this in a second. I just want to kind of set the stage here. So there's a nice fundamental thing. I'm trying to figure out what I can write down or draw versus what I have to just, it's faster for me to just describe it, but I'm trying to figure out what I need to actually visualize for you to understand. So if you're player A, there's player A, B, and C, let's say. Player B and C sends some packets to the server, and B and C, no, how do I want to do this? I want to do it the other way. Player A sends some packets to the server. Player A resolves, the server resolves what player A is doing, sends it out to player B and player C. Player B and player C are going to see player A do the exact same thing. It is going to be totally consistent. In fact, if we put in 20 players, player A, well, yeah, player A is going to see what players B through T, or whatever they are, do. How is the best way to put this? Let's stick with B and C. Players B and C are going to see players A, D, E, F, G, etc. up to T all consistently. B and C will see the exact same thing for both of those. They'll see those people interact the same way and everything because the server is resolving all of that and sending the packets to B and sending the packets to C and sending the exact same info to B and C, and they just see absolutely the same thing for everyone else on the server, ignoring packet loss and the, optimizing the network to minimize traffic, and so you send lossy info or whatever. But the fundamental conception of time, they see the same thing for those. But what they don't see the same thing as everyone else is themselves, because they're client-side predicting. So they get to immediately interact, but the server doesn't see it till later. So now let's go ahead and be concrete with this. So since the server is authoritative, let's talk about what's happening at time t on the server. And let's hypothetically, just to use simple rounded numbers, pretend everyone has these huge, enormous latencies of multiple seconds. It's not how it's ever going to work in practice, but the logic of it works the same. And we could imagine I'm using units of tens of milliseconds, or some other unit that would make these numbers make sense. But so let's say that player A has a 10-second ping, and that player B has a 20-second ping. Okay, what happens on the server at time t? Well, let's assume that the ping is symmetric, so it takes half the time for a packet to go one way and half the time for it to go back. So at time t, we get an input packet from the player A that's 5 seconds old. So it happened at t minus 5. From the server's perspective, we're not going to worry about what clocks anyone else has. We're not worrying about synchronizing clocks. We're just saying, like, God's eye view of the entire universe, what happened 5 seconds ago, ignoring relativity. 5 seconds ago on player A's machine, he did some input. And that gets to the server now. And the input from player B is from 10 seconds ago. All right. Now, we've talked about the fact that the server might potentially reach into the past to try to do stuff. That's what all this stuff was about. That the server wants to somehow have the input from the player happen in the past or happen in corresponding times in some sane way. But there's no way, no matter how short the ping, no matter what the algorithm is, at time t minus 5, what was player A looking at, right? This is when this player did this input. So what was this player looking at? Well, he had just received server state at t minus 10, right? Because the 5 seconds is how long it took the server state to get to it. And this is when the server processed the input from the player at t minus 15. Okay, so I'm nesting this in a crazy way, but I want to be concrete about this. What the player saw, because I started at the wrong point. So what the player saw then couldn't have been anything better than what the server did then. The server didn't see that player's input till then. So the server could reach back in the past and try to update for the player and have it be happening earlier and potentially compensate for that. But he can't do anything about this. The player A can't have seen, at the time he did this input, anything earlier, anything later than this. So the player is absolutely entering input 5 seconds later than it happened. And the point here is that when the server processes this input at time t and sends it out to everyone else, maybe he can unwind it a little bit into the past or something and have everyone have a more consistent view, because it let's ignore that. Let's pretend he doesn't ruin it. If he just does it immediately, he just says at time t, I'm going to make what the player tried to do at t minus 5 seconds happen at time t. That will go out to the other players at t minus 5 and get to them sometime later. I don't even know how to explain this coherently. The point is that these two times are different. Okay, and the point is that I was trying to figure out how you rewind the time and make these somehow consistent. But because the player personal feedback loop, okay, this explanation is going nowhere. Let's just cut straight to the chase. I think what you do is you accept this problem and you simply say the player has an inconsistent view of themselves in the world. Oh, a good thing to talk about here is the lag compensation, the whole shooting around the corner problem. The two players, opposing players, are doing input, and one of them runs around a corner and the other one shoots at him. Shoots at where he was before he ran around the corner. Because of all these network latencies, there's no way to avoid that. So everyone has decided to resolve this in favor of the shooter. Because shooting is sort of an active action and hiding, dodging is less directed, less aimed at a particular thing. And so they talk about the fact that they, in fact, if you have like a specific put up my shields button, then maybe they sort of cheat that and make that take precedence. But in the general case of the lagged shooting, you favor the shooting. And the way you do that is you just break the rules. Like the player got around the corner and then dies, even though the guy couldn't see him anymore from his point of view, because from the other player view, he could see him. The whole point of that whole discussion is they see different things. Like you just accept that is part of the reality. They're going to see different things. And I talked about how when you have 20 players on the server, you know, B and C see the same thing for the other 18 players. It's just themselves that are inconsistent, which means B's view of C and C's view of B are inconsistent. And in fact, they're pairwise view is different. So like if they ran into each other, they would each see a different behavior than what the server decides. The server decides, oh, they really ran into each other. They might have actually not run into each other on their own machines independently for different reasons. So how does this all shake out for this question? Well, the answer is that you just don't worry about this time delay. That was why I got bogged down trying to explain this, because I'm already aware of like how I think the solution to this is. So at server time t, you get this input from this player, and you just play it back now. So what we're saying is that, let's say let's not use firing. Let's say the player jumps. So say player A presses jump at t-5. Again, remember, these are all bogus times. All right, we're just using these times to have round numbers. So server processes A's jump at t. And now because the server is authoritative, player A is going to jump at time t. Absolutely at time t, not at time t-5. So then the server sends out a packet to B with A jumping at t. And then player B, ignoring interpolation or delaying packets so we can interpret them, sees A jumping at t plus 10 seconds on the server, measuring from the server when the server hits time t plus 10 seconds. And that time we look over at what player B sees, that's right when he sees A jumping. Now, player B is seeing everything delayed by 10 seconds, so it's all consistent. If something else happens on the server at time t, this will all be consistent. So suppose we have built a physical clock with 3 hands that rotate, and the server is just, it's not a special thing. Like somebody just hacked it in, there's no special networking smarts about it. Somebody's just put this in as a physical object. It's just got constant turn rate on all the things. And the server is sending across the orientation to all the players. And we've just happened to set that clock so that, you know, t 0 seconds is, you know, 12:00. Then this is going to be seen with the clock at that time, because that clock is also delayed. This physical clock hand is also delayed in exactly the same way. And everyone will see the player jump at exactly 12, except the player. The player pressed the jump at t-5. He's getting his packets from the server at t10, so his clock is going to show 11:59 and 50 seconds. And in fact, this is something that's kind of a weird thing that nobody talks about, I think because these games don't do that. I've talked about the fact that the hard part of client-side prediction stuff is that you lose the player versus player interaction. I talked about that, like the players clocking. People tend to avoid that kind of thing because it's hard. Even proxied through shooting at each other, you have to put in special lag compensation and just break this stalemate of they have an inconsistent opinion about what happened. You just have to accept that and pick one of the inconsistent things. So player versus player seems to be the hard part. But if you actually do this, so this is why maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there is still something more going on. But if you actually do this, suppose player A tells everyone through TeamSpeak, I'm going to jump at 12:00. Then everyone's going to say, no, we saw you jump 10 seconds later. Or, yeah, it's 10 seconds later. And of course, if their TeamSpeak has lower latency for some reason, they'll actually be able to discuss this before they see it happen. Again, you'd never have pings this high. But, And this actually has consequences on game design. If you imagine the platformer, one of those classic platformers that has disappearing platforms that like go on a timer, if you didn't do any special networking stuff for this, and the timer, the thing just appears and disappears and appears and disappears, player is going to jump onto a platform that he thinks turned solid at this time, but the server isn't going to decide he jumped on it until, oh, I started updating that. I was switching it to this state when the player jumps at 12. The player tries to jump on the platform when the clock shows 12, but the server doesn't see him jump on it until 12:10, well, 12 o'clock and 10 seconds. And if maybe at 12 o'clock and 10 seconds, the server thinks the platform has already disappeared. Mind you, the player saw all this stuff synchronized. He could see that the platform always appears exactly on the minute, you know, say, because the clock is delayed to him in the same way that the platform is delayed to him. And he sees this and he jumps, but because we're doing this client-side prediction, we're allowing the player to intentionally get inconsistent from the server. So what you do is you don't make timed disappearing platforms. You avoid this. Or you start doing lag compensation-y things for these. But it's interesting that the one everyone talks about in all the documentation online is just the shooting case, because people obviously either know this and avoid it, or just nobody's ever tried to do this. So this is the kind of thing that I thought, it was that kind of issue that made me think you had to do one of these other crazy things, because, where I was basically trying, even though I didn't really understand what I was doing, trying to bring the player to a more consistent view with the server. But I think the reality is that you just don't let them be consistent. You intentionally understand that they are inconsistent. You avoid game design stuff where that inconsistency would cause a problem. And like I said, everyone talks about the game design stuff to avoid the problems, but they're really only ever talking about player versus player stuff. They're never talking about player versus server stuff, which is why it just never crossed my mind that the player would be that inconsistent with the server. But I think they are. I think that is the assumption that everyone's doing. So what was in that Blizzard thing is that they just talked about the fact that they buffer the client packets coming in, and that's all they do. And they weren't really explicit about any of this stuff, so I'm not sure that this is right, but it actually makes sense. And this is what I've implemented here. I thought I was going to implement one of these. I don't remember which one I ended up saying I thought I was implementing. Yeah, implement method 1. So I thought I was going to implement method 1, buffer client input for some length of time, then execute a global tick for the entire system. And the thing about this is the some length of time. Like, I was still thinking about how you synchronize their clocks in some way, right? I was thinking that, you know, the player input happened at t-minus 5 seconds. So if I had 5 seconds, ignoring this, units are bogus, if I had 5 seconds of buffering on the server side, you could resynchronize everything and make everyone see a consistent view of the world. And I don't think that's possible, because the player can never see them. If you're doing client-side prediction, the whole point is to let the player have their own behavior happen immediately. And I don't think you can ever bring that stuff back to be consistent. And so that's why I implemented it. I buffered, and I tried to think about how to synchronize the clocks, and I couldn't figure that out. And I said, I'll worry about that later. And now I'm just buffering some. And that turns out to be exactly what they said they do. You buffer some because there might be dropouts. So you want to have a little bit of a buffered client input. You're delaying a client input by a little bit more than they're paying even, just so that you can make sure you don't run out. So what happens is, if you run out, if the player is sending these control inputs, and he has to send one for every frame, like, because you want the physics to match, and the player wants to move at 60 frames per second. So you really have to, I don't know how you would go about not simulating at 60 frames per second. So, you know, here's these frames of input that the player is doing. And the server sees them later, right? And packets might get dropped, so we resend all of the input multiple times in case the packets get dropped. But here's the interesting thing. Like, suppose these packets just get delayed. Right here, the server is ready to simulate packet number 10. if we weren't doing any buffering and like the server had gotten synchronized and saw, okay, this is when I'll be getting the player's packet. So I'm going to, when I get the packet number 5 from the player, that I'm just going to hand that off to my current simulation step that's right then. Like, here's the simulation steps on the server. Ignoring the fact that the spacing needs to be adjusted. So we get here and we don't have anything to do. So we have to fake a player input. And then we resync here. Okay, what happens if we have the opposite problem and we're not buffering? Right, these are just latent. That's just confusing. We're not buffering. Here's when the packets come in. But suppose the latency from the client to the server got a little shorter. The ping shrunk by a little bit. We'd get 9 and 10 really fast together. And I need that spacing that I was talking about, because these are 2-digit numbers. What might happen if we didn't have a buffer is we would never be able to play. We're simulating 1 player input per frame. We can't simulate 2 player inputs per frame. We're just doing a simulation. So we would end up dropping packet 10. And if packet 10 had something important in it, like they pressed the jump button right then, like maybe we'd have to cheat and pack that into packet 11 as well. And that's just all gross. So what you want to do is deal with the variable latency from the client by sticking the client's input into a buffer. And I think they were saying that they buffer 4 packets, something like that, or 4 inputs. And I'm currently buffering 12 or something like that in my code. So, and I was like, oh, I have a 12 input buffer. Let me make it be exactly 6. I'll buffer 6 and have room for 12, so that if you fall behind or you fall ahead, you have some room to cover. And that may be the right idea. Like, they sounded like they were just doing 4. They weren't trying to synchronize in the middle exactly. It was very unclear. They weren't super specific. So it may just be that what I'm doing is the right thing and I need to tweak the numbers. Like, the whole syncing in the middle, like, lets you, if their latency gets shorter and shorter, your buffer will get smaller and smaller, and eventually it gets down to 0. And if it gets any shorter, you're just screwed, and that's life. But if their packets start coming in later, you need room in the buffer for more packets. So it would kind of make sense that you say aim for 4, and if they start getting later, then you end up buffering more because you are trying to not throw away any of their input. So it may just be that the current algorithm I have is basically correct. Let me check chat. So I'm strictly talking about the client to server stuff. The server to client stuff needs other ways of handling the dropped packets and stuff. So like the idea of extrapolating movements is something you might think about for the server to client side stuff. From the client to server side stuff, if what you're trying to do is only transmit the inputs themselves, you just have to not lose any inputs. My understanding is that dead reckoning is very bad for human-driven inputs. So which is why everyone on the client side, they buffer and interpolate between the last 2 packets of what's coming from the server. Because if you just take what's coming in from the server and extrapolate, then people will like come to a halt in front of a cliff, and your extrapolation, you won't know that they're coming to a halt yet, and you'll just have them walk off the cliff. And then they'll teleport back, or smoothly warp back once you discover that they didn't walk off the cliff. And through wall, if you don't run physics on your dead reckoning, they'll walk through walls and all sorts of other terrible stuff. But you have to extrapolate if you don't have a packet, though, right? Yes. I haven't worked on any of the interpolation stuff, so I don't actually know. This is what everyone says they do. It may be that you'd rather than extrapolate, you'd actually prefer to just have them halt. The halting extrapolation, the sample and hold extrapolation, is better than the linear prediction interpolation extrapolation. Because in one case, people may, like, if you don't run physics on them, you like have all sorts of problems in shooters where like you see someone through a wall because they poked through the wall temporarily because you extrapolated them through a wall. That like can be game ruining. Whereas if you just freeze them in place, they'll never at least violate some of the basic things. Of course, you can do physics on your dead reckoning and prevent people from doing that. The walking off of cliff case is a little harder. I play the games where I see people constantly walking off cliffs and teleporting back, and it's really dumb. Whereas I think if you just stop them dead, at least kind of everyone knows, oh, that's a network glitch. But I could be wrong. I've never done it before, right? So the interpolation is obviously a little gross. Like, you do need to somehow deal with, I think they talked in that Overwatch video about the idea of variable, the adaptive delay for the interpolation stuff, changing how you're, if you see that people are coming in with very regular stream of updates, then you go ahead and reduce the buffer size. Yeah, if you step the simulation, then that's dead reckoning with applying the physics is basically. But yeah, probably the stuff that I'm doing, I was planning on not simulating because I'm not sending inputs across. I'm only going to send output results across so that you can have smarter servers, sort of. So that means I can delete this entire discussion of the server because I just didn't understand it. All right. So, is there anything I wasn't clear on in that discussion? I mean, I was all super hand wavy, right? So. Oops. God damn, where's my M? There. I'm using the arrow keys with the right hand, so the left hand is having to come over to type the M, and it's totally failing. So that's a 250. That's a 100. Oh, B was supposed to be higher. So my goal is to make a system that does a fair job of networking everything by default. And that means my plan is to just try to network the states of everything from server to client and network the input from the client to the server. And any client-side prediction you want to do is done piecemeal. So it will do the player's movement by default. Maybe I'll put in vehicles and try to intentionally make the vehicles also client-side predicted, because apparently that's something most people don't do. So it'd be interesting to see why, or see what the upshot of doing that is. But, you know, if you throw a switch, it'll do a server round trip. Like Minecraft kind of has an interesting variation on that. In Minecraft, when you dig something out, the block disappears client side, but the resource isn't generated from, you know, the loose block isn't generated except by the server. And there's some way, wait, or does it just not disappear? I'm trying to remember. I've seen this happen on people's YouTubes. I'm pretty sure the block disappears, but somehow the block will reappear if it turned out to not happen. Although I'm not sure how it would never not happen. How would it fail? How would that synchronization fail? Yeah, I think the main thing that happens is that somebody else digs the block out first, and then it wouldn't actually matter. So it's really just that the resource gets generated late. And then one of the things is then you try to dig through a block behind that block, and now that's weirder. Yeah, I can't remember. I've definitely seen really weird things with Minecraft, but there's other synchronization problems where they get out of sync about what the state of the block is, and that's a different issue. This is just something I've seen with lagging servers, where the client side does show the block disappearing, and it takes forever for the server to catch up. But there's some weirdness that happens there when you do multiple blocks at that point, but I don't remember what it is. Anyway, so as I've mentioned before, so one of the things this resolves, because what I was kind of thinking was that the buffer size, right, we're talking now, I just showed a little chart about buffering 4 packets or 6 packets or whatever. I'd originally been thinking that you have to buffer for sort of a certain length of time, and that if the client's ping was too high, that wouldn't work anymore. But this whole mechanism all works. Everything works great. If you have a super high ping, what you're doing doesn't happen on the server until much later, and the higher your ping gets, the more inconsistent your view of what you're doing timed relative to everyone else becomes. So if there was something that you had to do, like, you know, jumping on a platform that's disappearing, you would have to compensate as your ping got worse, but you wouldn't affect anyone else. They would still just see you doing this thing. It's only when we apply lag compensation tricks that give you a benefit that it starts to hurt everyone else's view. And so you do those very judiciously. And so that's why I think doing no lag compensation by default, doing client-side prediction of your own movement is probably fine. As long as we don't have disappearing platforms, things where you need to have, where you try to do stuff and it matters what the server thinks, the server simulation. If you're interacting with something that is purely simulated on the server, you're going to have problems. So, you know, in Minecraft, the lava spread, you know, you might walk through a square that doesn't have lava yet, but by the time your message gets to the server, the lava has now spread to that square and you get set on fire. That would be the kind of thing that would go wrong. Yeah, the client is literally just sending abstracted keys. It's abstracted button down events, button up, or not events, state of them being down or up. Just because that's the smallest thing that the player can send, and it's 100% consistent. The only problem happens if you ever lose some of those packets. If the server never sees the packets at all, your motion could be wrong, which would be okay. That gets corrected. But like, you know, you drew your sword and the button that you pressed to draw your sword never got transmitted through, and now you never drew your sword on the server. That would be terrible. So you have to watch for that kind of thing. And the main way that that's done is just by sending all of the player's input multiple times. Every frame, I'm doing it every other frame currently, you send the last 6 frames of packet of data, because you're sending so little information, and packet headers are pretty big, so you might as well stuff a bunch of data in there. So what you stuff is the player's input from the last n frames. Then if you lose 3 packets in a row, it doesn't matter, because that 4th packet's still going to have all the data that you needed for the last 3 packets that got lost. I'm reading chat. Yeah, so I don't even know if I'm going to bother coding at this point. I just wanted to walk through that stuff and make sure I understood it, because like I said, what the code is actually currently doing is pretty close. It's got a buffer size for the number of packets it does, and when it loses sync and resyncs, it tries to buffer exactly half that buffer size to give leeway for the variable latency, and then just consume the input once a frame. Now there is one really important clock synchronization here that is kind of an interesting one, which is that, you know, let's just, for the sake of argument, assume the server is simulating at 60 frames per second and that the client is simulating at 60 frames per second. What happens if those 60 frames per second calculations are wrong? Like, is it possible that the internal clocks are off by 0.001% or something like that? And as that drifts over time, what happens? Well, the main thing that happens is that the client input packets to the server are going to be happening, you know, a little too fast or a little too slow, and that's going to cause it to slowly fall ahead or behind in that buffer. But that buffer exists, and, you know, buffers for packets, so that drift would have to actually be, you know, you play for a day and, you know, you get 4 packets. Like, it's more likely you're going to have network glitches that cause marked issues. In the worst case, if that clock drifted and you filled that buffer, emptied that buffer, you would have a resync and refill that buffer and lose some player input at that point. So I think that's not anything to worry about. I think the reality is also that everyone's clocks are pretty well synchronized on that level, but I don't actually know. I don't know how that stuff works. I don't know where is that based on mains power cycles, or is it based on some internal crystal, or what? I guess it depends on what I'm using. I use query performance counter for that. No, I use get time for that, I guess. Well, whatever the SDL equivalent is. But as long as it's super whatever. Yeah, I'm going to type in chat just a little bit here, so bear with me. All right. So, like, I guess let's at least look at the code and see what's going on with it. I still got to replace the network layer. Okay, here we go. Max client input history, 12. All right, let's just make it 8. Max client frame number. Okay, that's they're transmitting frame numbers and trying to synchronize in some way, which I not sure there's any point to it. Basically, the client can communicate back to the server like, hey, you sent me packet. You sent me a packet that said that the current server timestamp was X, and here's the input that I did on frame X. But it doesn't matter to the server. The server's already done frame X. It's not going to go all the way back and try to apply that, which is what that other discussion was about. It could try to go back in time and reapply stuff. But if yeah, like, it's just not worth it. Like, you're going to be desynchronized by some amount no matter what, and your view can never be consistent. So it's probably cleaner to just have it be inconsistent by your exact ping plus the buffer. Right, so here we send across the controls, and we send multiple inputs per packet. 6 30 hertz packets. How big are our player net controls? I mean, they may get bigger too, but for now, net controls. Is that still up to date? No, it's not. It's now 8 bytes. And I guess I said the packet overhead was 28 bytes. So currently 60, so it's about 25%. Oh wait, this is 80 now. So about 20% of the packet is going to the overhead. So if we lose 3 packets in a row from the player, we'll lose some of their input. And okay, so one of the things that I was doing is I was like, let's only send the packet every 30 times per second. Your model of what your packet loss could be different. You could say, oh, we lose 3 packets in a row. What happens? The other thing could be like, what if all packets from this time window get lost? Because one thing we could do is we could try sending twice as many packets, ignoring the overhead, with half as much data in them. So why is it times 10 if the number is actually 6? Yeah, that was assuming I was buffering 10. So if we buffer 10 packets, 10 inputs at 30 hertz equals 108 times 30, whatever that actually turns out to be, which is 3,024. Now, suppose instead, the naive version of that is to buffer 5 inputs at 60 hertz. But now the packet overhead is bigger. Right? That'll be 8 times 5 is 40, 68 packets per second times 60. And that is 3,600 plus 8 times 60, which is 480. So that would be that. So what have we gained? What have we lost? So now if we lose, well, this one was actually set to 10. So this would survive losing up to 5 packets in a row, 4 packets in a row. So this can lose 4 packets in a row. So if we tried to equalize, the bit rate, we need to reduce this. Like 4 inputs would be wait, it's 68. The 4 inputs is 68. That wasn't 5 inputs. 5 inputs would have been 50, 78. Okay, so we could only buffer 3 inputs at 60. That would be 28. Oh, no, right. I was multiplying on the wrong side. No, I wasn't. Okay. 3 times 8 is 24 plus 28 is 52. 52 times 60 is twiddle 3,000. It's close enough. Okay, but now, because we're only buffering 3 inputs, we can only lose 2 packets in a row. If we lose 3 in a row, we'll have lost an input. It does imposes an extra 1/30th of a second, which is what, 33 milliseconds latency versus 60 hertz. And in terms of the time window that they survive, this can lose 4 packets in a row at 30 hertz. This is fewer packets at a higher rate, so it's a much shorter window. So this is way worse. But if we started trying to send even less frequent packets with even more buffered, we would start imposing too much latency. But we can just bump up this number too. If we're worried about losing packets, we could have each packet buffer 12 inputs. Because this number is so small, the amount of bandwidth we're using is so small. 108 times 30 is 3240. Oh yeah, I lost a 0 in this. On the other hand, if we are looking at running 1,000 players on a single server, then the bandwidth that's coming in from all those players might be significant. On the other hand, we'll probably have to send more anyway out, so maybe we just don't worry about that. And maybe it is okay to just say, let's just, buffer 12 inputs at 30 hertz. So that's another 16. Is that number actually right? That seems low. 8 times 12 is what, 80 plus 16 plus 28. Yeah, I guess that's right. So then that times 30 frames per second goes up to 3720. And this one's back at 4. Oh, right. No, it was 5, except I'd done the math wrong, right? 40. No, wait, now that seems right. 8 times 5 is 40 plus 28 is 68. So I had done that right. Right, 40, 80. So this can lose 5 packets in a row. This can lose 4 packets in a row. So maybe that's a pretty reasonable rate. I mean, I just made up all those numbers in the first place. Okay, so where was I in this? That I was looking at this. So let's go ahead and just bump that up to 12. I don't know what the reason for the time range is. Oh, I see. Yeah, it's a much bigger buffer now. 60, it's what, 16 milliseconds each? So it's 1/60th of a second. 12 60ths is 1/5. So it's a 200 millisecond buffer. And then that means each 60 hertz input is in, should be half, right? 6 packets. But So the whole thing here is that we do have an ability to rewind the server. This is talked about in that Overwatch video. But we don't rewind the server for just player motion. Player motion just happens immediately. The only thing we rewind it for is the shooting lag compensation, assuming I ever implement this. And that is that part where the server does have to save some history so he can check shooting in the past, because the target has gone around the corner but hadn't gone around the corner in the past when you shot, so he looks back in the past, sees that you could shoot him, etc. Max client input history, right? That's the thing I just changed. Buffer client input on the server, lag compensation history buffer size count. This is part of the packet data I was talking about, that the server and the client can send what they think the time is, but it's maybe not useful. Like, maybe it's just not ever going to be used. Based on my new understanding. And it needs to be used for the lag compensation thing. It needs to know what it thought it was. So probably the client wants to send along what it thinks the server timestamp is. So the server needs to send the server timestamp, and the client needs to send it back. And somebody needs to explain the ping, obviously. So like the client needs to be able to display what the ping is, or the server needs to compute the ping. And it can do that using that info. Maybe that's enough. But I think this stuff is dead. This was being used to try to do that pseudo clock synchronization, and I think I just don't want it. Oh, the mask I do need, because that's the halfway point. Oh, this is what I was using to figure out if I got out of sync. Yeah, so I was using this. Right, the client needs to send timestamps so that the server knows when they got lost. It doesn't need to be, it could use packet numbers or something, but the whole point here is the client input gets timestamped, not so the server knows anything about their relative timestamping, but just so it can decide, because it's seeing the same inputs coming in multiple times, it wants to know which inputs are the same that overwrite each other. So that's what I'm using that for. Okay, that makes sense. Yes, the lag compensation thing is useful for shooting people where, you can now take damage, because you can take the damage asynchronously. It doesn't have to happen in the right place. You can have weird things happen where, like, where do you generate the blood spatter effect? Maybe everyone just sees it wherever the guy who got shot currently is. So he got around the corner and you see the blood spatter around the corner. Or maybe you see it where the guy who was shooting saw it. But yeah, if you wanted that to feed into a simulation, because it's intentionally breaking the normal synchronization, it would be hard to feed into a simulation. Which is one of the reasons why I still find Rocket League's networking pretty fascinating, because they seem to be doing some kind of lag compensation for you hitting the ball, in that you get to hit the ball without worrying about the latency that you have, the ping you have to the server. It feels the same to hit the ball no matter how your ping is, which seems to me to mean that they're doing some kind of lag compensation-y thing for when you hit the ball, and yet feeding it back into the simulation of everyone. Now, part of that is because it's a little chaotic. If two people hit the ball almost at the same time, it is unpredictable what happens. Nobody's trying to know exactly what that's doing. Although actually you do see people try to pinch it between two players, but I think nobody knows for sure whether they did it right. So when the server arbitrarily, in some sense, randomly puts together what happened on everyone's machine and picks a final arrangement of what happened, even though it wasn't what one player saw, you accept that, because that's a little chaotic. As long as the pure case of one player versus the ball is handled. I don't think that's true. I think Rocket League, when you jump, feels pretty responsive. But the other thing is that I've seen people playing with 400 millisecond pings, and I play regularly with 120 millisecond ping when I play on East Coast servers. So, in fact, I've seen up to 180 for myself, and I do not feel 180 milliseconds of latency. I definitely execute exactly the same input sequence to hit the ball, regardless of that latency. But I think they're cheating, right? I don't think, like, if you had if your simulation was written in a scripting language with lots of weird interacting, sort of, you know, like a looking glassy or something kind of thing, you know, or Minecraft machines, if you would, like somebody was talking about that they had a game where we were talking about the whole vehicle client-side prediction thing, and where they had a game where the vehicle was constructed out of a simulation. And yeah, that just, I don't think there's any good way to do that. In Rocket League, it works because it's a very pure interaction of a single player on a single ball that they can do the same kind of latency compensation cheating. I mean, I could be totally wrong. Maybe they're doing something totally different. But that's what it feels like to me. I don't think of them as geniuses. Like, nothing in that game, it's a genius design, but nothing in the game technically feels genius. So it would actually kind of surprise me if they were doing anything deeply clever. But something's going on there, and I don't know what it is. I mean, I just have the data points that if someone has a very high ping, if another player, not you, has a very high ping, everything in the game looks normal except their interactions with the ball. You tend to see this effect where they run into the ball and then sometime later the ball suddenly shoots out in a different direction, which was the direction they actually hit it. Right? So that's sort of evidence that they're doing a local interaction with the ball in their machine, deciding which purely locally, in some sense, client authoritatively decides which way the ball gets to go. And then you only get to find out about it after the server has already done a bogus, incorrect simulation of what they did with the ball. And when you have a high ping, because I have once in a while had a very high ping, you start to see every hit do the same thing. So what that suggests is that they are trying to deal with this server synchronized thing that I was rejecting in this discussion. Because what's happening is every player, you're now seeing the sort of late hits. You're not seeing a view of the world. Remember that whole desynchronizing from the clock thing. If you were desynchronized from the clock, it would mean you would see the same thing everyone sees, right? That's the traditional view. You know, two players on the same team watching the other players interacting with the ball should always see the same thing. It was sort of the model that we've talked about here. And you definitely don't. If one of you has a really high ping, you will see weirdly latent hits when the other team, even though the other team has a high ping. You will see something different than your teammates do. And that seems to suggest to me that it is trying to stimulate with the clock locally the entire game state, and then only finding out what players really did with a sum of, you know, the time from their trip to the server and then the trip from the server to you. No player input buffering. Right, so we're taking the client, what the client say their frame number is. We don't care about synchronizing with anything. We're just using it to control the buffering. The client input offset just tells us where. Yeah, I should figure out a way to rephrase it. So instead of being synchronized against the server's simulation time step, it's just about the buffer position. But for now, I'll leave it alone. Let's not call it a clock because that's misleading. So there's a question about the lag compensation, and I'll explain what I intend to do, but it does have a slight problem in that it can be gamed. It's not making the client authoritative, but it's letting the client game things in a way that I slightly worry about. So that is as follows. The server has time steps, and it records when it sends the player some state about, like, let's just assume we are doing a shooter and you can shoot at other players. So when you send a player state to some player, doesn't matter which way, you record that you sent it and what the server timestamp was, and that packet contains the server timestamp. You actually encode the server timestamp more efficiently and other stuff, but it doesn't matter. When you get back, so player A moves, you send to player B a packet saying that player A is now at this position, and you timestamp it. Sometime later, you get back from player B, I'm shooting. In the I'm shooting thing, it includes the server timestamp that was most recent that it was reacting to. And if it's interpolating, it might actually include the interpolated timestamp. Now the server says, okay, it's currently time 1000, but you said you shot at time, 950. So let me go look back in my input, my output buffer, my history buffer, and see what I sent you that I had marked time 50, 950. Right? So it's currently 1000. You sent this packet some time ago. In that packet, you said that the server timestamp, you, the client, sent something that you said the current server timestamp that you had seen was 950. So I go back in my history and find 950 and see where the player was, and I compute the shot on that. So nobody needs to synchronize any clocks there. You just need to establish. You just need to pass back the server's timestamp so that the server is computing against the right thing. And as I said, it's a little exploitable because you could potentially cheat and, like, which server timestamps you could design a client that, like, freezes people in position temporarily while you're shooting at them and says what the server timestamp was for that. But I think there's not much you can do about that. If the player was in a position where you could have shot at him, you can shoot. Like, in the same way, you can't do much directly about aim assist, whatever you call it, like auto aim bots, or something. Like, it auto aims. It produces the correct angle. All you can do is to, like, detect that it's happening. Because they're too suspiciously accurate, or they, turn too quick or whatever. Which is why everyone breaks out the monitor the client stuff, even though it's a server authoritative thing to try to prevent cheating. I think this falls into that same category. You can watch and say, well, if this person, first of all, you don't allow them to say, I shot 2 seconds ago. Right? You put some limit on how far back you're willing to rewind history. 500 milliseconds. If someone has a ping bigger than, it's double that, right? So if somebody has you pick it so it's 500 millisecond ping. If they have a ping bigger than 500 milliseconds, they have to shoot ahead. They do have to start leading weirdly, just to avoid having to store too much on the server, but to avoid that exploit. And then also you have the player always send back what their timestamps are, not just when they shoot. what the server timestamp is. And you check to make sure that those server timestamps aren't doing weird things. They're not allowing them to go backwards or, whatever. I think that's probably the best you can do. And I think it's a reasonable thing that you can do. Overwatch does the compensation for the 4-frame input buffer. No, I believe they said explicitly that they had some time window. They talked about they show sort of 3 states of the thing, and the one is the one back in history. How far you're allowed to rewind time, I think, is the term that they used, and that was independent of the client buffer. It was definitely a separate thing they could tune. What they've said is obviously there's variable and adaptive, but there was some limit to it, how far back they were willing to buffer. And I don't remember. I think that was one of the things where they started talking about if you have a regular stream of inputs, we'd like to, if you're not having packet loss, if your connection is good, we want to do something better there. I think that might have been one of the sides where they talked about that, but I don't remember the details. Yeah, and if you make some of these buffers adaptive, if somebody has a stable connection, you only need a 1-frame buffer, so you can reduce the latency. So right here, I was talking about that I had a 12-frame buffer or 12 input buffer, not 12. This one, client input history. This was 12, and I just pushed it down to 8. And so by default, it's going to try to give you a 4 input buffer, which will be for 30 hertz. I think that's, no, because I'm stimulating at 60 hertz. So yeah, that will be 4 60 hertz inputs, or about 66 milliseconds of latency. So it's trying to cover for variable latency of double that, 133 milliseconds, by starting in the middle. So if you swing by 66 milliseconds to either side, it can compensate. If you have a really regular input stream with a good connection, it is imposing extra, right? The client and the server, we're saying, are intentionally, we just know their view of the world is different for the timing of what the client is doing versus everything else in the world, which is all consistent on the server. Anything that's client-side predicted. So there's a bunch of latencies. There's already the latency due to the ping time. There's a latency due to the extrapolation, or interpolation rather. If you buffer some of the server packets and interpolate between them, that's going to add some extra buffering there. That's going to add a little extra latency. And there's this buffer. And so we can shrink all of those if we want to reduce the latency. So if you have a good connection, you could do a thing where I currently default this to halfway through this buffer, and it could try to default it. It could say you have a good connection, so I'm going to default you to trying to only have at most 1 client input buffered. And you can then try to do that on the other side. And if you have a high ping, this doesn't help that much because you already have a high latency, so maybe it's not worth trying to reduce that. But if you have a low ping, maybe it's worth it. And so yeah, the Blizzard Overwatch, in the video, they talk about being adaptive about some of these things. And we won't bother with that for now, but we could in the future. So people are asking about what happens when you do the lag compensated shooting. So you shoot the guy after he goes around the corner and he dies. What about stuff that he did before he got around the corner, right? Because he's the shooter shoots him while he's still, before he's going around the corner. But from his point of view, he makes it around the corner before he dies. And so what happens if he shoots, say, back at the other shooter during that time interval? So before he sees himself dying, before the server decides he's died, but after the other player shoots at him, so you can sort of mutually kill. And I see a lot of games where you can mutually shoot each other. Obviously, if you have slow projectiles, it's easy to mutually kill each other. Or if you have, you could have a game where, you get shot, but you get a couple frames of input before you really die. I don't think anyone implements that, but you could implement that, right? You could say, ooh, you didn't get shot in the brain, you get not a couple seconds to bleed out, but just, a moment of still being conscious and in control. So you could easily set up a game where you could intentionally, legitimately under the simulation, shoot each other with hit scan weapons. But I think what actually is happening is it's just a fallout. Nobody's actually implementing that intentionally. It's just a fallout of the networking choosing to favor shooting, choosing to not have them die until you don't have them die in the past. You don't undo all the stuff they did. This is part of what that other stuff that I deleted was about. The player shot him at T-5, but the server doesn't decide he's dead until T, and everything he did up till time T is still applicable, including him shooting back. And I think that's why you see a lot of games where you can mutual. But not every game. I'm sure there are games that do try to analyze this. And of course, if you both have really low pings, it'll never happen. But all right, so I was walking through this. Yeah, so I'd like to rewrite all this based on the new understanding, just to kind of clean up the understanding of what's going on. But I think it's all okay, basically. I think it's all doing the right thing in some sense. Mostly I'm answering things in the chat that have already been answered by other people, so I'm not trying to exactly answer the questions per se, but just give useful information for the stream and for the archive. Yeah, I should rename this to connection info because it's not really ping. Yeah, so I don't know. Do people want to see me do some programming, or was this a good discussion? Yeah, and somebody pointed out a game where you see somebody shoot a rocket and then they die and the rocket disappears. And of course that can happen in two ways. That can be because the game decided they died before they shot the rocket, and so it undoes the rocket. It actually cleans up the networking. Or it could just happen though, it's a game design thing. Like you definitely see single player games where, opponents shoot and then if you kill the opponent, shot disappears. So it's possible that a game like that is actually doing that for game design reasons. But yeah, it's certainly possible to go into the past to try to undo things that have happened in the past. It's just complicated, and it's very simulation specific. And so for a generic engine like this, I don't want to try to do anything like that. I want Anything that's happened in the simulation you're committed to. Anything that happened in the simulation on the server has happened and is fixed forever. Now, when two players shoot each other, that gets resolved on the server, and it has to get resolved in some order on the server. The server is serial. So it's not the case that you would need to have the mutual occur under the basics of this rule. It's more an issue of fairness, that the player hasn't died yet. Like, the server decided this player has died, but the player has not gotten that packet yet, and he shoots before he gets the death packet, and it's like, do you want to count that or not? And in a naive version, no, you would just say, well, the server already said you're dead, and when your shot comes in late, like, it's like, no, you didn't shoot. You thought you shot, but you didn't shoot. It's sort of the easy way to resolve that. But because people like to resolve things in favor of the shooter, it's probably a little more common to go ahead and allow that shot to happen. I don't know if it's common. I just feel like I see a lot of games where you do see the mutuals a lot. Well, so what I thought I was going to do was do some network programming, but I've come to the conclusion that I think what's in there is correct. So like I said, I kind of want to rewrite it to be clearer about what I now understand that it's actually doing, but I think the code is actually right. So I'm not sure that I need to work on that. Where did I leave this in the last thing? Like, was it just working? Was that networking actually seeming to be working? Or was it, oh, no, I added the client-side prediction, and then maybe it was working? I don't remember. Let's at least find that out. I remember looking at myself, but I don't remember if that was after I did the client-side prediction or not. So, games, WPG, C6, debug, WPG, is that what it's called? Okay, there's no server running, though, so that won't work. Okay, so run the server. So if you're watching the archive and I did already do this, then this isn't very useful, but whatever. Where's my mouse cursor going? Oh, it's being hidden because SDL, I told it to hide it or something. All right. So let's run one client. So I believe I left this with the client-side prediction running. All right, I made it drop right because one of them was getting stuck. So I think I left this with client-side prediction. Oh, right, but it's laggy because just the control scheme is laggy. So I need to fix that so it feels responsive. Okay, and then I need another. Another client. And I can see the other player. And I got stuck. Why am I stuck? And this is the one that's not running in the debugger, so I can't. Oh, now I got unstuck. Well, one thing is I'm spamming a ton of input that actually might be hurting performance, but this one is definitely weirdly screwy. Let's go back to the other client. This is smooth and responsive. Which one of these? Well, it's not even letting me tap to it. This is really weird and fucked up. Okay, so probably I have a bug where I'm applying like the wrong input to somebody, or where the buffers are affecting each other or something. So I probably need to debug this on the server. Oh, there it goes. Now it's working. Now it's decided to work. Not sure what was going on there. All right. Well, let's suppress some of this output just to make sure that's not responsible. probably what we need. Oh, that's not going to work. Probably what we need to do is only output the second player if it turns out to be consistently the second player, but I don't even know if that's going to be true. Okay. Oops. Didn't get rid of that one. Okay, that still feels fine. And it's still jammed. Oh, no, wait. Maybe I was just moving in the wrong direction. No, it feels sluggish. Oh, I mean, I am rendering more OpenGL now when I have 2 up. Where is it? Why am I not showing up on that other one? Oh, there he is. But if I switch back to the other one, it's not. Yeah, it just feels fine. So it's not the OpenGL. It's not the fact I'm running 2 of them. This thing has a lot of cores, a lot of GPU power. Yeah, anyway, I can see the frame rate. It's fine, actually. Except now it feels fine. Now it's not glitching. So there's some thing where it's taking a while to synchronize. I remember there was a problem with it not synchronizing at the beginning, but well, you can see in the output. Well, you can't see. Probably it's too. But now it's synchronized, and this one feels fine. Mysterious. I don't know. That's very odd. Why is this not? Oh, okay. All right. Well, how about we start a player? Exit and we start at 1 again. So we come down to the second position. Is this one also going to be screwed up? It definitely has a glitch at the very beginning, but I think that might be that initial 256 frame synchronization failure. Which I guess I should fix. Let's go ahead and fix that. Whoops, that's the wrong button. Which is, we can see that here. Okay, what is it this is printing out? Who is printing this out? Client net tick. Okay, we're having the server send back what connection info. The server sends back what the client frame was, just so that the client can see what's happening. And what's happening is that the server is failing to synchronize the client input. And so, can you see this? Yeah. Oh, except I ran the server again. So you can see in that bottom left window, the server was at 0 while the player was currently going up. And it wasn't until he got all the way around that the server resynchronized. So we need to fix that so the server synchronizes immediately. Otherwise, the player input is ignored for those first things. That actually has to be debugged on the server. It's just that I can only see this feedback from it on the client. So why does that not synchronize when I have this synchronization code happening? So we get a player input. Let's just go ahead and we want run, and then we want break in here once we start a client. Let me do it before it gets to... Shoot, I lose my cursor. It's already passed. Yep, damn it. Yeah, okay. Is that something I can control? Can I prevent it from hiding my cursor? I think not. I think it was linked. I think I looked at this. It was linked to having the mouse be relative or something in SDL. I don't remember where that was. Yeah, like if I don't make the mouse relative, I think that doesn't happen, but then the mouse won't be relative and I won't get mouse input, probably. Oh, somebody's still running. Okay, so, wait, that's what I'm breaking there. All right, so we got a client input. Input frame was 53. Oh, we're only syncing at the halfway point. We only sync when we cross the halfway frame point. Okay, well, it's just totally terrible. We want to do this. The input frame is no longer in the valid window. Recomplete the client buffer offset. We want to do this all the time. Why do we update this? Oh, I see. Then we rely on this thing to fix it up. But why is max client? Why, if we're past the halfway point, do we add a full thing to the offset? That doesn't seem like it makes sense. Client frame halfway point. I mean, I understand in one sense what this is trying to do, but yeah, it's half of max client frame number. Right, we're trying to, the real client frame numbers we imagine are a 32 or 64-bit number, and we're only seeing the bottom bits of it. So when we cross from the largest one to the smallest one, we need to increment the other thing. And I'm doing something to do that at the halfway point instead of doing it at the turnover point, and I don't know why, and I don't know what this is doing. Except that it's going to get fixed up here anyway, so I don't even know why I need to do that. Okay, so, all right, let's, I don't know what the right way to do this is. I'm writing this from scratch in some sense, but starting with the code that's here. Like I'm instead of trying to understand what this code is doing, I'm going to do this. So let's just start here. All right. If the input valid frame is no longer in the valid window, recompute a client buffer offset. So we just got a player input, and it's either too old or too new compared to the buffer that we currently have. Now, if it's too old, we might just assume this is a stray old packet and we should discard it. Right? It might just be a packet that took a long time to come through the network and we should discard it. Not resynchronize against it. So that's something I'll have to fix in the future. So Right, so all this is trying to do is, this is why we're saying maybe it doesn't want to be in terms of the server timestamp, but for now, I'm leaving the logic the same. We just want to make sure that the current input frame that we're getting, of course, the input frames come in with 12 packets, 12 frames worth of data, so so we actually just want to make sure that the window of those is okay. So I should actually do something about that. So the oldest one, the oldest packet is actually that. Because I think the input frame is the newest packet. So if the oldest packet on server timestamp has to be the timestamp we're about to execute. Let's check that. Okay, here we're going to look at p history of input 0 with no okay, sure, whatever. We'll just roll with it for now. So if the oldest packet is too old, or if the newest packet is too new. Oh, I'm adding client input history to the future, but I don't think that's right. Input frame. Let's look at where we create the player input. Build packet for player. Oh no, that's the output packet to the player. Where's the player net controls? Build input. Client net tick. I guess it's arbitrary. It could be the number of the last packet or the number of the first packet because it's an arbitrary number that isn't used for anything else. Let's say that it is the frame number of the most recent packet, though. So, of course, this is maybe the old logic was already correct, assuming it the other way around. Because it was adding it on this side. Okay, if that happens, then we want to make sure the current input, the newest frame, which is that, falls at the halfway point. Although, do I want to really be the halfway point when I've got so many in them? Okay, so now the only thing that we have to do is deal with the fact that input frame, all this logic makes sense if input frame were the actual client frame number. But it's not the actual client frame number. It is the bottom n bits of the actual client frame number. So we need to reconstruct the top bits. And currently, I was fudging that into this. But maybe it will be cleaner if instead we fudge the top bits I see what this is doing now. Okay, so what this is doing is it's saying, assume we don't lose any packets. What this is saying is if input frame is 0 and the previous input frame was 255, But because we might lose packets, what we do is we set a flag once we see a packet that's in the second half of that 0 to 255 window. And maybe it's smaller than 0 to 255. Maybe we'll only send 6 bits or something. So when we see a packet that's in the last half, we set the flag. When we see a packet that's in the first half, that's the sign that we wrapped around, and we add max client frame number to our offset. Maybe it would be clearer if we just kept a separate client top half thing and explicitly added it here. And then we would have to include that in this. Like we would just change input frame. We would recode input frame into the large number. Maybe that would be cleaner, but I think this is all correct. I'll just do this here. Okay, I think that's all reasonable, actually. So I just need to document it better. Like that's the problem I have with OPBG streaming is I don't write down enough comments. Okay, but now, oh, and now I've moved the synchronizing thing out, so maybe it'll just synchronize right at the beginning. Maybe. P arrow. Oh, right, I did that here. That's just everywhere, isn't it? Oh, no, wait. That's not here. That's somewhere else in the code. Okay. All right, let's see if that fixes that. Yes, they seem to have immediately synchronized. Okay, so now let's see what happens when we do the second player. I doubt that had anything to do with it. It was why I was stuck on the tree at the beginning, maybe, but I don't think it was why I was having the weirdness. Or maybe it was. No, it's doing something. I'm losing the, oh, I'm losing the mouse because I turned off the SDL mouse thing. Okay. Gotta fix that back. Oh, people talking about compressing network packets, blah, blah, blah. If you have money, talk to Rad. But this is not a Rad stream, so that's all I will say. Right, so I did that. And we should just special case the first input packet, actually, and just force it to the middle of the buffer. Maybe I'll do that. Okay, let me start the second player. Now it's not going wrong. Maybe that had something to do with it. I don't know. The logic was a little wonky. It would only resync. It was only resyncing every 256 frames. So if something did happen to cause it to fall out of sync, I don't know how that would happen, but maybe there's some other bug. Now it's resyncing all the time and hiding that bug. But hey, it definitely seems to feel okay. So, I mean, that's only one test. Maybe it's still busted, but I'm just going to assume for now that did fix it or hide it. So there, I did a little programming. Oh, there was something I was going to fix. What was it that I wanted to fix? There was some easy thing. Oh, right, the very first packet. I should do some special sync. So let's find P history. Player input history. Let's just do it hardcode. Scene input, which defaults to 0. So then process player input. So right here, we want to force it to be synchronized. So if P arrow scene input is false, or if it's out of range, then sync it. And then now we have scene input. And let's actually be more explicit about what that means. Initial synchronized. Initially synchronized? Initial synchronization. Done. Initial. Why not be wordy? This is only place this is going to appear anywhere in the code, so we can make it wordy. All right. So I don't think that will change anything at all. So we'll run it to make sure I didn't break it. And that feels fine. All right. So, and let's see the initial synchronization here. Oh, I made some blank lines. Okay. See, yeah, here's an interesting glitch. I'll have to investigate what's going on there. Are those packets coming late from the server because it's UDP? So are those stale packets? Did the server send out some 0 packets at the beginning? Right, and the replay is the info about how many client-side predictions it had to replay. Yeah, this is all weirdly bursty. I don't know what's going on there. I'm currently at 41, that jumped to 46, 48, 50, 51. It's just getting stuck for a bunch. What is player currently at printing? Player currently at client frame. Where do we update client frame? Client net tick. We increment that every time. So that output is us getting a burst of, not that one, these ones are 5 inputs all coming in the same frame. And we're actually keep replaying the thing. So for some reason we got 5 packets from the server at once. Even though the server's only sending packets every other, or is it sending them every frame? I don't remember. And then the 0 are a mystery. The 0 are either really ancient stale packets or some bug. So yeah, I gotta investigate that. Like for this, I just want to confirm. I'll just want to like brackets, like yeah, maybe just add a. Let's just do ODS client nettick. And then. Okay, we can see eventually it's stabilized, but there were some occasional spikes and gaps. But I don't see any of those big ones. Oh, here's one. Burp, 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 and then the client net tick. So somehow, some kind of bad interaction between the server and the client there. Okay, here. So we got a ton of server ticks all in one frame, and the client did all these ticks here, but the server at 0 is pretty weird, unless that's it losing sync and resyncing or something. Why would the ping be that high? Kind of weird. Well, okay, so yeah, the server. You play 1. This may be the server running out of client packets, right? So players currently 32. The server, it's because of the replay. This is how much this client-side prediction has to replay the client-side packets. So it gets to here. It makes sense that if it got more server packets, it would have nothing to replay, and it would break. The question is why that would happen. I think I will investigate that at another time, though. I think I'm not going to deal with it. So yeah, I think I'll wrap the stream here, and that'll be something we'll have to look at next time. What did I do this time? I fixed the initial sync. I think that's it. Yeah. It's not just the initial sync, that's right, because it was screwed up later. Yeah, all right. And nobody's asking any questions, so I think I'll stop the stream, and I can answer. If there are other questions, I will answer off stream, but I don't think there's anything that needs archiving at this point, since conversation has moved on. So anyway, so yeah, that's it for the stream. I'm committing as we speak, and or pushing as we speak, and yeah, I think that's I didn't do very much, but I think it's all a little bit clearer, and I may wrap networking and try to move on to something else. It's obviously not done, but I think I may consider this like kind of enough, and move on to something else for a while. next time. But maybe I'll do a little cleanup on it next time first. All right, so that's it. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.